Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of Knoxville, Tennessee. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The quiet rural outskirts of Knoxville hold many secrets beneath the rolling Tennessee hills. None perhaps more disturbing than what unfolded at the Hatfield property in the autumn of 1907. What began as a series of unexplained disappearances would eventually lead investigators to an abandoned well on the edge of the Hatfield farm, a discovery that would haunt Knox County for generations and reshape our understanding of what might lie beneath the seemingly tranquil landscape of East Tennessee. The Hatfield family had been respected members of the community for nearly 3 decades. Thomas Hatfield, a stern but fair-minded man with a reputation for meticulous attention to detail, had established a modest but profitable tobacco farm on 20 acres of land approximately 7 miles northeast of downtown Knoxville. The property sat in a small valley sheltered by low hills to the north and east, with a creek running along its western boundary. Together with his wife Margaret, described in community records as a woman of considerable education and refined sensibilities, they had built what appeared from the outside to be a model of rural prosperity. The farmhouse, a 2-story clapboard structure with a wide front porch supported by 4 hand-turned columns, stood at the end of a long dirt drive lined with oak trees that had been planted when the property was first purchased. A large barn, painted the traditional red with white trim, housed the farm equipment and livestock. Several outbuildings, a smokehouse, tool shed, and summer kitchen completed the picturesque scene that could have served as an illustration of agricultural success in early 20th century Tennessee. What makes this case particularly unsettling is not just the ultimate discovery, but how ordinary everything seemed in the days and weeks before. According to accounts in the Knoxville Sentinel from November 1907, neighbors reported nothing unusual about the Hatfield household in the months prior. The family attended services at First Presbyterian Church on Gay Street every Sunday, without fail. They sold produce at the local market on Saturdays. They participated in community gatherings, with Thomas serving on the county agricultural board and Margaret known for her contributions to the church's charitable works. By all accounts, the Hatfields were living the quintessential American rural life of their era. Thomas, then 47 years old, was described by his peers as forward-thinking in his farming practices, but conservative in his personal habits. Margaret, 43, was remembered as quiet but pleasant in company, with a particular talent for preserving fruits and vegetables. They had no children of their own, a fact that occasionally prompted hushed speculation in the community, but was generally attributed to divine providence rather than any personal failing. The third member of the household, Thomas's younger brother William, had joined them in late 1898 after returning from military service during the Spanish-American War. At 38, William presented a stark contrast to his older brother. Where Thomas was robust and energetic, William was described by those who knew him as thin to the point of gauntness, with a perpetually distracted air. He had enlisted in the 4th Tennessee Volunteer Infantry with patriotic fervor, but returned from service a changed man. According to church records, William had once been considered for a deacon's position before the war, but declined all public roles after his return. Yet something was terribly wrong within the walls of that farmhouse, something that would only begin to reveal itself after Thomas Hatfield failed to appear at a meeting of the Eastern Tennessee Agricultural Society on October 17, 1907. He had been expected to present his plans for expanding tobacco production in Knox County, a presentation he had mentioned with enthusiasm to several colleagues in the weeks prior. His absence was noted, but not initially cause for alarm. James Pickering, the Society's secretary, later recalled, "We assumed some farming emergency had detained him. Such things were common enough. It wasn't until 3 days later, when the Hatfields missed Sunday services, that anyone thought to check on the family. Reverend Howard Phillips mentioned the absence to Elder Calvin Townsend, noting that in nearly 15 years he could not recall the Hatfields missing worship without sending word ahead. Townsend, who owned the adjacent property to the east, agreed to stop by the farm on his way home. What was discovered, or rather, what wasn't discovered, would set in motion one of the most disturbing investigations in East Tennessee history, one that would eventually involve not just local authorities but federal agencies and scientific experts from as far away as Washington, D.C. Sheriff's Deputy James Connolly was the first official to arrive at the Hatfield property on that Monday morning, October 21st. Responding to Townsend's concerned report that the farm appeared deserted despite all signs that the family had been in the midst of their daily activities. His official report, preserved in the Knox County Records Office until 1965, when it was transferred to microfilm, describes an eerie stillness that hung over the property, as if the very air had been frozen in time. The front door was unlocked, unusual for a rural home even in those more trusting times. Coffee cups sat on the kitchen table, half-filled and long cold. A pot of stew remained on the stove, the contents spoiled, but indicating a meal had been in preparation. The family Bible lay open on the sideboard to the Book of Revelation, a detail that would later take on particular significance to some of the more superstitious residents of the county. A clock on the mantel had stopped at 9:47, though whether morning or evening wasn't clear. But there was no sign of Thomas, Margaret, or William. Their personal effects remained undisturbed. Thomas's pipe and tobacco pouch sat by his favorite chair in the parlor. Margaret's knitting basket contained a half-finished scarf beside her rocker. William's spectacles lay folded on his bedside table alongside a copy of Popular Mechanics magazine. Most disturbing, according to Connolly's report, was the absence of any signs of struggle or violence. The Hatfields had simply vanished in the midst of an ordinary day. Their wagon and horses remained in the barn, well fed and cared for, suggesting no planned journey. Their clothing hung in the wardrobes, including the heavy coats that would have been necessary for travel in the increasingly cool October weather. A half-written letter from Margaret to her sister in Chattanooga sat on the writing desk, ending mid-sentence. William has been acting peculiar since his return, often speaking of what he saw in the investigation proceeded with methodical care. The property was searched thoroughly, including all outbuildings and the surrounding fields. Neighbors were questioned about any unusual activities or visitors. Telegraph messages were sent to relatives in neighboring counties. The local newspaper ran a front-page story asking for information. No one had seen or heard from any member of the Hatfield family since the evening of October 16th. As days passed with no sign of them, speculation grew throughout the community. Some suggested they had abandoned the property due to financial troubles, though a check with the Mechanics National Bank revealed the Hatfield accounts to be in good standing, with a considerable sum on deposit. Others whispered about family disputes, particularly regarding William's increasingly withdrawn behavior since his return from the war. A few of the more imaginative residents suggested kidnappers, though no ransom demand ever materialized. Sheriff Matthew Donaldson, described in contemporary accounts as a man of uncommon thoroughness and limited imagination, approached the case with professional detachment. His methodical nature would prove crucial in documenting the increasingly strange aspects of the investigation. In his personal journal, unsealed by court order in 1957 as part of a historical review, he wrote, "The absence of any clear motive or evidence makes this case particularly troubling. I find myself returning to the property daily, convinced that something obvious has been overlooked." It wasn't until October 29th, nearly 2 weeks after their disappearance, that attention turned to the old well at the eastern edge of the property. The well had apparently fallen into disuse years earlier when a new one was dug closer to the house. According to Ezekiel Johnson, who had worked periodically as a farmhand for the Hatfields, Thomas had spoken of filling in the old well, but had never gotten around to it, considering it a project for when winter slowed the farm work. The well sat approximately 250 yards from the main house, partially hidden by a stand of pine trees that had grown up around it. It had a simple stone wall rising about 3 feet from the ground, with a weathered wooden cover that had been pulled aside. County records indicate the well was approximately 40 feet deep, with water levels that varied seasonally with the underground springs that fed it. Deputy Connolly later admitted that the well had been checked only cursorily during the initial search of the property. It had a heavy cover on it, he explained in testimony recorded during the coroner's inquest. It didn't appear to have been disturbed. It was only when Johnson mentioned Thomas's plans to fill it that investigators decided to examine it more closely. What they found when they lowered lanterns into its depths changed the nature of the case entirely. According to the official report filed by Sheriff Donaldson on November 1, 1907, the bodies of 3 individuals, later confirmed to be Thomas, Margaret, and William Hatfield, were recovered from the well. The report notes with clinical detachment that all 3 appeared to have sustained blunt force trauma to the head before entering the water. The discovery transformed what had been a missing persons case into something far more sinister. Yet even as the investigation progressed, troubling inconsistencies began to emerge. The medical examination, conducted by Dr. Harold Fletcher of Knoxville General Hospital, noted unusual aspects to the injuries. In his report, preserved in county medical records until they were sealed by court order in 1922, Dr. Fletcher observed that the patterns of injury suggested the trauma occurred at different times, possibly days apart, rather than during a single violent incident. The male identified as William Hatfield, Fletcher wrote, presents with cranial trauma consistent with an impact occurring approximately 96 hours before death. The female subject, Margaret Hatfield, shows similar trauma but of more recent origin, likely 48 hours before death. The injuries to Thomas Hatfield appeared to have occurred within hours of death. Even more puzzling was the condition of the bodies themselves. Despite having been submerged in water for nearly 2 weeks, they showed surprisingly little decomposition. Dr. Fletcher noted this anomaly but could offer no scientific explanation, suggesting only that some quality of the well water, perhaps a high mineral content, appears to have slowed the normal processes of decay. The discovery of a leather-bound journal belonging to William Hatfield, found hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his bedroom, added another layer of mystery to the case. The journal, which covered the period from his return from service in late 1898 through October 1907, revealed a man deeply troubled by his experiences during the war. The early entries described nightmares, insomnia, and a persistent sense that something followed me home. By 1900, these complaints had evolved into more specific concerns, focused increasingly on the old well. But it was the entries from September and October 1907 that drew particular attention from investigators. Written in an increasingly erratic hand, they painted a disturbing picture of William's deteriorating mental state. September 3, 1907. I hear it again at night. The sound from the well. Thomas insists it was sealed properly, but I know better. I know what's waiting down there. The same thing they found in Cuba, the same thing they tried to harness. It speaks in vibrations that travel through stone and soil. Most can't hear it, but I was exposed. I was changed. September 17, 1907. Margaret watches me. She knows I've been going to the well. She doesn't understand what needs to be done. Thomas is beginning to listen, though. Yesterday I showed him the substance I extracted from the water. Under electrical current, it glows with a light that casts no shadows. He was skeptical until I demonstrated its effect on the rabbits. Now he understands the potential. October 10, 1907, Thomas found my uniform. The stains haven't come out. He asked questions I cannot answer. The well calls louder now. We've begun construction of the apparatus. The principles are similar to what we used in Florida, but adapted for this particular manifestation. Soon we will all understand. The final entry, dated October 16th, the day before the family was noted missing, contained just 3 lines. It responded tonight. The vibrations are stronger than anticipated. Thomas believes we can control it, but he's wrong. Some forces were not meant to be harnessed. God forgive me for what I've brought into this house. The journal raised disturbing questions about William's state of mind and his possible role in what happened to the family. Sheriff Donaldson's investigation began to focus on the theory that William, suffering from what some physicians of the time were beginning to recognize as war neurosis, had attacked his brother and sister-in-law before taking his own life in the well. This theory was supported by statements from neighbors who reported changes in William's behavior in the weeks before the disappearance. According to Martha Simmons, whose farm adjoined the Hatfield property to the north, William had become increasingly agitated and was often seen walking the property at night, particularly in the direction of the old well. He wasn't right after he came back, Simmons told investigators. According to transcripts preserved in the sheriff's records, he would stand for hours just staring at nothing, and he talked about water, always about water and what was beneath it. Said he could hear things in the well that nobody else could hear. We all thought it was the war that had affected his mind, but now I wonder if there wasn't something more to it. Simmons also reported that in the week before the disappearance, she had observed lights near the well late at night. At first I thought it was fireflies, she said, but it was a steady glow, bluish in color, not like any lantern I've ever seen. It lasted for hours, well past midnight. I mentioned it to my husband, but he said it wasn't our business what the Hatfields did on their own property. Yet as the investigation continued, this narrative began to unravel in unexpected ways. A careful examination of the physical evidence revealed details that contradicted the initial theory. According to Dr. Fletcher's final report, dated November 15, 1907, the nature of William's injuries made it highly improbable that they were self-inflicted. The angle and force of the trauma suggested it had been delivered by someone standing in front of him, not consistent with either a fall or self-harm. Furthermore, fibers found under Thomas Hatfield's fingernails matched a jacket belonging not to William, but to Thomas himself, suggesting some kind of struggle in which he had clawed at his own clothing. Similar fibers were found under William's nails. Margaret's hands, curiously, showed no signs of defensive wounds or struggle, but her wrists bore marks consistent with having been bound, though no rope or binding material was found in the well. Most perplexing was the discovery made by Deputy Connolly during a second, more thorough search of the property on November 7th. In the attic of the Hatfield home, carefully hidden behind a false wall that might never have been discovered, had Connolly not noticed discrepancies in the dimensions of the rooms below, investigators found a collection of documents dating back to the original purchase of the property in 1878. Among these was a survey map that differed significantly from the official county records. The map showed a series of underground structures, or caverns, beneath the eastern portion of the property, directly under where the old well had been dug. These formations were marked with symbols that had no obvious meaning but appeared to indicate varying depths or perhaps different types of underground features. Accompanying the map was a letter from the previous owner, one Jacob Mercer, to Thomas Hatfield, dated April 18, 1878. The letter, written in a shaky hand that grows increasingly erratic toward the end, contains a warning. Mr. Hatfield, I feel bound by conscience to inform you of certain aspects of the property which you have purchased. The eastern field, particularly near the old oak grove, sits above what the original settlers called the breathing ground. There are passages beneath that no man should disturb. The well that stands there now reaches too deep. I have heard things in the night that have no place in God's world. I sealed it as best I could before departing. I advise you to fill it completely and dig elsewhere for your water. Some depths are not meant to be plumbed. Also found in the hidden space were several notebooks filled with Thomas Hatfield's handwriting, dating from 1900 to 1907. These contained detailed observations of the well and the surrounding area, including measurements of water levels, temperature variations, and what he called atmospheric disturbances. The entries were meticulous and scientific in tone, suggesting that Thomas had been conducting some kind of long-term study of the well long before William's apparent obsession began. An entry from 1904 noted, "The water level dropped significantly during last night's electrical storm. This pattern has repeated with sufficient consistency to suggest a correlation. What force could draw water downward during periods of atmospheric electrical activity? This defies known hydrological principles." A later entry from early 1907 mentioned William directly. W continues to insist that his experiences in Florida connect somehow to the anomalies I've documented here. His description of the effects on the test subjects matches what I've observed in small animals left near the well overnight. The implications are troubling, but potentially significant from a scientific perspective. This discovery casts the events at the Hatfield farm in an entirely new light. Had Thomas Hatfield known about whatever lay beneath his property for years before the tragedy? Had William's military service somehow connected to these phenomena? Had the brothers been collaborating on some kind of experiment involving the well? The investigation began to shift toward the possibility that something about the well itself, perhaps gases or contaminated water, had affected the family's behavior. Records from the Tennessee Geological Survey conducted in 1899 indicate that the region around the Hatfield property sits atop a network of limestone caves, some of which contain pockets of natural gas that can cause disorientation and paranoia if inhaled. A supplementary report commissioned by Sheriff Donaldson in December 1907 confirmed the presence of unusual levels of methane and other gases in the air surrounding the well. More troubling, it detected trace amounts of elements that the chemist, Dr. Lawrence Pritchard of the University of Tennessee, could not immediately identify. Dr. Pritchard, a geologist who examined the site, wrote in his assessment, "The particular composition of gases emanating from the shaft suggests a connection to deeper cavern systems than is typical for wells in this region. Prolonged exposure could certainly produce significant alterations in mental state, including paranoia, aggression, and hallucinations. Of particular concern is the presence of an unidentified isotope in the water samples, which exhibits unusual properties when subjected to electrical current." This finding led to a new theory, that William, spending time near the well, had been affected by these gases, leading to paranoia that eventually culminated in violence against his family members. Yet this explanation still failed to account for certain details, particularly the timing of the injuries and the peculiar state of the bodies when they were recovered. By January 1908, the investigation had reached an impasse. Without conclusive evidence to determine exactly what had transpired at the Hatfield farm, Sheriff Donaldson officially closed the case, listing it as a domestic incident with multiple fatalities. The property was sold at auction in March 1908 to cover outstanding debts and taxes, but rumors about what had happened there ensured it changed hands several times over the following decades, never occupied for more than a few years at a time. The story might have ended there, becoming just another dark footnote in Knox County history, had it not been for the discovery made by Dr. Elias Montgomery of the University of Tennessee Anthropology Department in 1952. While conducting research on early settlements in East Tennessee, Montgomery came across William Hatfield's military records, which had been stored in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. What he found contradicted a key assumption of the original investigation. According to the official record, William Hatfield had indeed served in the 4th Tennessee Volunteer Infantry during the Spanish-American War. However, he had never deployed to Cuba as previously believed. Instead, he had been assigned to a small unit tasked with guarding a military installation near St. Augustine, Florida, for the duration of the conflict. The records indicated that William had received medical discharge in September 1898, following what was described only as an incident during routine operations. His commanding officer's report noted that William had been exposed to conditions resulting in severe nervous debilitation, and recommended his immediate return to civilian life. A medical addendum signed by a Dr. Marshall with no first name or rank given described symptoms including auditory disturbances, nocturnal terrors, and a persistent belief in subsurface communications. If William had never seen combat, what explained his troubled behavior upon returning to Knoxville? What were the things he saw that Margaret had begun to reference in her unfinished letter? Montgomery's curiosity led him to track down William's former commanding officer, Colonel James Barrett, by then an elderly man living in retirement in Virginia. Barrett's response to Montgomery's inquiry, preserved in the University of Tennessee Special Collections, presents yet another twist to the Hatfield story. According to Barrett, William's unit had been assigned to guard not just any military installation, but a specific building where certain sensitive research was being conducted. Barrett was circumspect about the nature of this research, noting only that it involved the extraction and study of unusual geological samples from various territorial acquisitions. Most significantly, Barrett revealed that in August 1898, there had been what he termed an incident at the facility. During a test involving electrical stimulation of a particular mineral sample, there had been an unexpected reaction that resulted in the deaths of 2 researchers and the mental compromise of several guards who had been in proximity to the experiment. Following this event, several guards, including William Hatfield, had been abruptly discharged and sent home under strict orders not to discuss what they had witnessed. Barrett's letter concludes with a disturbing observation. I have often wondered what became of those men. Several of them, I later learned, met unfortunate ends. The things they were exposed to were not meant for ordinary minds to comprehend. I still wake sometimes hearing the sounds that came from that chamber, not screams, you understand, but something more fundamental, as if the very air was being torn. Montgomery's discovery reignited interest in the Hatfield case. In 1953, he petitioned the Knox County Court to unseal the medical records from the original investigation. His request was granted, allowing him to review Dr. Fletcher's complete findings for the first time in over 3 decades. What he found in those records further complicated the already puzzling case. Dr. Fletcher had noted unusual characteristics in the lung tissue of all 3 victims, describing a peculiar discoloration and structural alteration unlike anything previously encountered in my medical practice. The tissue showed evidence of cellular changes that Fletcher could not explain with the medical knowledge of the time, suggesting exposure to some unknown agent. Fletcher had preserved samples of this tissue for further study, but according to a note in the file, these samples had disappeared from the hospital laboratory within days of being collected. A follow-up inquiry indicated that a representative from the federal government had taken custody of the samples, though no record of this transaction was ever officially filed. Additionally, Fletcher had documented unusual residue found on William Hatfield's hands and forearms, a black sand-like substance that did not match any soil from the property or the well. Chemical analysis performed at the time had been inconclusive, with the substance described only as not consistent with any known mineral indigenous to the region. Similar residue, though in lesser amounts, was found on Thomas's hands, but not on Margaret's. Fletcher's personal notes, separate from the official report, included observations that had never become part of the public record. I cannot shake the impression that what happened to the Hatfields was beyond the scope of ordinary human violence. The nature of the cellular changes in the tissue samples suggests exposure to some form of energy or radiation unknown to current science. The substance found on their hands resembles nothing in my experience, seeming to shift in color and texture under different lighting conditions. Most disturbing were the eyes, All three showed a distinctive clouding of the cornea that I have previously observed only in individuals exposed to certain industrial chemicals. Yet the pattern here is different, more symmetrical, as if the change had been induced with precision rather than by accident. Armed with this new information, Montgomery assembled a small team to conduct a more thorough investigation of the Hatfield property, which by then had been abandoned for nearly a decade. The current owner, a land development company based in Nashville, granted permission for the academic study, apparently unaware of the property's history. On June 17, 1954, Montgomery, along with geologist Dr. Howard Reynolds and chemist Dr. Ruth Abernathy, arrived at the former Hatfield farm. The house had long since collapsed, but the stone rim of the old well remained visible, though the shaft had been filled with earth and stone decades earlier on the orders of the county health department. Using equipment that hadn't been available to the original investigators, the team conducted soil samples around the well site. What they found was considered significant enough that their preliminary report was forwarded to the recently established U.S. Geological Survey Office in Knoxville. According to this report, dated July 3, 1954, the soil surrounding the well contained unusual concentrations of several rare earth elements, including cerium and lanthanum, at levels far exceeding what would occur naturally. More concerning was the detection of isotopes that Dr. Abernathy's analysis suggested were consistent with decay products of radioactive materials not normally found in natural deposits in this region. This discovery prompted a more extensive investigation, now with federal oversight. In August 1954, a team from the USGS arrived to conduct ground-penetrating radar surveys of the area around the well. Their findings, classified until 1967, confirmed what Jacob Mercer's old map had suggested: the presence of extensive cavern systems beneath the eastern portion of the property. Most significantly, these caverns appeared to connect to a larger subterranean network that extended for miles beneath the surrounding countryside. The report noted anomalous features within these caverns, including what appeared to be chambers of unusual symmetry and passages that defy normal geological formation processes. Of particular interest was a large cavity directly beneath the well site, described as a spherical void approximately 30 feet in diameter, its walls exhibiting a vitrified appearance consistent with exposure to extreme heat. Plans were made for a physical exploration of these caverns, but before this could proceed, the entire project was abruptly halted. According to the USGS report, one branch of this network appeared to reach depths of over 300 feet, far deeper than any known natural cave systems in East Tennessee. According to a brief notice in the university archives, dated September 12, 1954, all research related to the Hatfield property was indefinitely suspended pending review by appropriate authorities. No explanation was given, and requests for clarification went unanswered. Dr. Montgomery returned to his regular academic duties, and the Hatfield case once again faded from public attention. In a curious footnote, both Dr. Reynolds and Dr. Abernathy left the university within 6 months of the investigation, with no clear record of their subsequent careers. Attempts by colleagues to contact them in later years proved unsuccessful, leading to speculation that they had been recruited for classified government research, or perhaps silenced for discovering something they shouldn't have. Montgomery himself became increasingly reticent about the Hatfield case. In a 1956 letter to a colleague who inquired about his research, he wrote only, "Some doors, once opened, cannot be easily closed again. I have seen what lies beneath, and I cannot unsee it. I advise you as a friend to direct your scholarly attention elsewhere." The story might have ended there, becoming nothing more than a local legend, had it not been for the discovery made in 1962 during the construction of what would become Interstate 40. As excavation crews were cutting through a hillside approximately 2 miles from the former Hatfield property, they uncovered the entrance to a previously unknown cave system. Standard procedure called for geological assessment before construction could continue. The team assigned to this task was led by Dr. Victor Kaufman of the Tennessee Department of Transportation. His initial survey, intended to be a routine evaluation, instead uncovered something that connected directly back to the Hatfield mystery. Deep within the cave system, in a chamber untouched by human presence for what appeared to be decades, Kaufman's team discovered the remains of a makeshift laboratory. Equipment dating from the late 1890s, glass vials, primitive measuring devices, and a hand-cranked generator had been carefully arranged on stone shelves cut directly into the cave walls. Most significant was a leather satchel containing a journal and several specimen containers. The journal belonged to a Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, whose name appeared on no official records from that period. The entries, covering from 1896 to 1898, detailed a private research project focusing on what Blackwood called telluric currents and earthbound energies concentrated in specific geological formations. The specimens, carefully preserved in sealed glass vials, contained samples of a black granular substance similar to what had been found on William Hatfield's hands. Blackwood's notes described it as responsive to electrical stimulation and capable of inducing vibrational frequencies that interact with nervous tissue in a manner suggesting direct communication. The final entry, dated July 23, 1898, contained a disturbing account. The sample from Site E has produced unexpected results. Exposure to electrical current caused not just phosphorescence, but actual structural changes in the surrounding air. Johnston's breathing was affected after just 30 minutes in the chamber. He described seeing movements in the shadows that none of the rest of us could perceive. More troubling, he insisted he could hear voices emanating from the sample itself, not audible sound, but what he described as thoughts that bypass the ears. We have sealed the primary sample in lead and will transport it to Facility 7 for more controlled examination. I remain convinced that what we have discovered here represents an entirely new class of element, one with properties that defy conventional understanding. If the military applications are as significant as I suspect, this could alter the course of the coming conflict with Spain. This discovery established a potential connection between whatever research Blackwood had been conducting, the military installation where William Hatfield had been stationed, and the subsequent tragedy at the Hatfield farm. Had William somehow been exposed to materials from this research? Had he perhaps even smuggled samples back to Knoxville? Had Thomas's scientific curiosity led him to collaborate with his brother in experiments that ultimately proved fatal? The Tennessee Department of Transportation's official report made no mention of Kaufman's discovery. Construction of I-40 proceeded after a minor adjustment to the route, bypassing the cave entrance, which was sealed with concrete and effectively erased from the landscape. Dr. Kaufman submitted his resignation shortly thereafter and relocated to Colorado, where he became a reclusive figure, declining all interviews regarding his work in Tennessee. In a private letter to a former colleague, found among that colleague's effects after his death in 1980, Kaufman wrote, "What we found in that cave system should have remained buried. I understand now why the Hatfield case was suppressed. There are forces at work beneath the surface of our world that human science is not equipped to comprehend, let alone control. I dream of black sand that moves with purpose, of voices that speak without sound. I understand now what drove those men to the well. They heard the calling, too." Interest in the Hatfield case surfaced again in 1968, when historian Margaret Wentworth began researching a book on unusual disappearances in East Tennessee. Through persistent inquiry, she managed to locate and interview Elizabeth Cooper, Margaret Hatfield's niece, who had been 17 years old when her aunt and uncle disappeared. According to Wentworth's notes, Cooper revealed that in the weeks before the disappearance, she had received a strange letter from her aunt that had never been mentioned in the official investigation. In this letter, Margaret expressed growing concern about both her husband and brother-in-law. Thomas spends hours with William now, down by the old well. They've constructed some kind of apparatus using parts from the tractor engine and materials Thomas ordered from a scientific supply company in Chicago. Thomas speaks of vibrations coming from deep in the earth, of messages that can only be heard in complete darkness. He has filled dozens of notebooks with what he calls translations, though of what language I cannot say. I fear what they might be doing, but Thomas becomes agitated when I express concern. Last night I saw lights from their lanterns down by the well until dawn. When they returned, their clothes were stained with some black substance that will not wash out. William's eyes had a vacant quality, as if he was looking through me rather than at me. Thomas speaks now of breakthroughs and contact, though he will not explain with what or whom. I'm considering taking the train to stay with you for a while, but I worry what might happen in my absence. There is something in the well, Elizabeth, something that should have remained undisturbed. Cooper further revealed that after her aunt's disappearance, she had gone to the Knoxville police, only to be told that the matter was already under investigation by the county sheriff. Her statement was taken, but apparently never included in the official case file. The letter she had received from her aunt, which she had brought with her, was taken as evidence, but similarly vanished from the record. Most disturbing was Cooper's recollection of a visit she received approximately 1 month after the bodies were discovered. 2 men identifying themselves as representatives of the War Department came to her home in Chattanooga, asking detailed questions about her communications with her aunt and uncle, and specifically whether any unusual objects or documents had been sent to her. Before leaving, they advised her that discussing her relative's case with others would not be in the national interest. Cooper maintained that she had largely honored this request out of a combination of patriotic duty and personal fear, speaking about the matter only to close family members over the years. By the time Wentworth interviewed her in 1968, Cooper was an elderly woman, concerned that whatever happened to Margaret and Thomas should not be forgotten, even if it can never be fully explained. Wentworth's research was never published. According to her son, interviewed in 1982 for a local newspaper article on unsolved historical cases, his mother had abandoned the project after a break-in at their home, in which her research materials were the only items taken. She died in 1971. Her work on the Hatfield case left unfinished. The final and perhaps most significant development in understanding what happened to the Hatfield family came in 1967, when documents from the early days of the Manhattan Project were declassified under the Freedom of Information Act. Among these was a memo dated 1942 referencing previous research sites that might be of interest to the newly formed nuclear program. The memo specifically mentioned an incident in East Tennessee circa 1907 involving spontaneous radiation effects and psychological impacts of exposure. It referenced a classified file designated Operation Wellspring and recommended that certain areas around Knoxville be avoided for nuclear development due to persistent, anomalous energy signatures. A supplementary document, partially redacted, noted that materials recovered from the Tennessee site exhibited properties similar to but distinct from uranium and other fissionable elements. These materials apparently displayed unique interactions with electrical fields and an unexplained capacity to influence neural activity in proximity. Most intriguingly, the document made reference to experiments conducted during the Spanish-American War period involving what was described as communication properties of certain mineral deposits. According to the heavily redacted text, researchers had theorized that these materials could facilitate direct transmission of thought impulses when properly stimulated, representing a potential revolution in military signaling technology. While the full Operation Wellspring file remains classified to this day, this brief reference established a direct connection between whatever happened at the Hatfield farm and later government research into nuclear energy and beyond. It suggests that what Thomas and William Hatfield encountered in that well was something far beyond the understanding of their time, perhaps a naturally occurring radioactive deposit with unique properties, or some other phenomenon that would only be properly understood decades later. The declassified documents also revealed that in 1943, as part of the early Manhattan Project, a team of scientists conducted a covert survey of the former Hatfield property. Their findings were deemed significant enough to warrant the purchase of several hundred acres of surrounding land by the government through shell corporations, ostensibly for agricultural research. This land was held under federal control until 1958, when it was quietly sold to private developers with specific deed restrictions prohibiting excavation below certain depths. Dr. Richard Feynman, the renowned physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project, made a cryptic reference to the Hatfield case in his personal notes from 1944. Discovered among his papers after his death, he wrote only, "The Tennessee samples present a theoretical challenge to our current understanding of atomic structure. If the observed properties are genuine and not experimental error, we may need to revise fundamental aspects of quantum theory. More troubling are the reported psychological effects which suggest interactions with consciousness that current science cannot explain." The Hatfield property today bears little resemblance to the farm that once stood there. The land was eventually purchased by a commercial developer in the 1970s, and a shopping center now covers much of the former farmland. The site of the old well lies beneath what is now a parking lot, unmarked and largely forgotten by most who park their cars there daily, unaware of what might still lie beneath. Yet in local memory, the story persists. Older residents still occasionally refer to unexplained equipment failures or unusual static on electronic devices in that area as the Hatfield effect. Security guards working night shifts at the shopping center have reported unexplained cold spots and the sensation of being watched, particularly in the eastern section of the parking lot. More concrete are the documented cases of unusual compass deviations in the area, recorded by several geological surveys conducted in the 1980s and 1990s. These surveys noted magnetic anomalies centered on the former well site, with no obvious geological explanation. Electronic equipment also exhibits higher than normal failure rates within approximately 100 yards of the site, a phenomenon that has been attributed to power fluctuations but remains inadequately explained. In 1998, a graduate student in geology at the University of Tennessee attempted to conduct a more thorough investigation of these anomalies for her doctoral thesis. Using ground-penetrating radar and other modern scanning techniques, she detected what appeared to be a large void approximately 50 feet beneath the parking lot, roughly where the old well had been located. Before she could complete her research, however, her funding was unexpectedly cut, and her faculty advisor recommended she choose a different topic. In her personal journal, later shared by a colleague, she wrote, "There's something down there that doesn't want to be found. I know how that sounds, but after what happened to my equipment, after the dreams I've been having, I understand now why this site has been avoided by serious researchers. Some questions are better left unanswered." In 2014, during renovation work on the shopping center, construction crews uncovered what appeared to be the remains of a stone well while excavating for new utility lines. According to the foreman's report, unusual readings on their equipment prompted them to contact the property owner before proceeding. Within hours, representatives from a private environmental consulting firm arrived and took over the site. The well was filled with concrete, and work resumed the following day with no further explanation given. A worker who was present later claimed in an anonymous online post that before the well was filled, one of the consultants had lowered a specialized instrument into the opening. "Whatever he saw on that screen changed him," the worker wrote. "He came up white as a sheet, making calls to someone he kept referring to as control. I overheard him saying, 'It's still active and the signal is stronger.' Within an hour, everyone was cleared from the site, and guys in hazmat gear were pouring concrete down that hole like their lives depended on it." What really happened to the Hatfield family in October 1907? The available evidence, pieced together over more than a century, suggests a tragic confluence of factors. William's exposure to something unusual during his military service, the presence of unknown elements or energies beneath the Hatfield property, and the family's fateful decision to reopen and explore the old well that Jacob Mercer had warned about decades earlier. Perhaps Thomas and William Hatfield, amateur experimenters caught up in the scientific enthusiasm of their era, stumbled upon phenomena they were ill-equipped to understand or contain. Perhaps they made contact with something that resided in the deep caverns beneath their property, something that had been there long before human settlement, waiting to be discovered. Perhaps the well did indeed reach depths not meant to be plumbed, connecting to energies or entities that changed them in fundamental ways before ultimately leading to their deaths. The fragmented nature of the historical record, with its missing documents, redacted reports, and mysterious government interest, suggests that whatever the Hatfields found was deemed significant enough to warrant ongoing official secrecy. The fact that modern scientific instruments still detect anomalies at the site indicates that whatever lies beneath the former Hatfield property continues to exert its influence, even as the world above has transformed from rural farmland to suburban commerce. Dr. Montgomery, in his final interview before his death in 1978, offered perhaps the most chilling summary of the case. The Hatfield tragedy represents more than just an unsolved historical mystery. It marks a moment when ordinary people encountered something extraordinary, something that exists at the boundaries of our scientific understanding. The well was more than just a physical structure. It was a portal to aspects of reality that our minds are not equipped to process. William's military experience gave him a framework for recognizing what they had found, but that recognition led not to enlightenment, but to destruction. Montgomery paused before adding his final thought. I've often wondered if the Hatfields were the victims of their own curiosity, or if they were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Either way, their story serves as a warning about the dangers of probing too deeply into the unknown. Some boundaries exist for our protection. Some wells should remain sealed. What remains clear is that despite multiple investigations over more than 6 decades, crucial aspects of the case remain obscured. The selective sealing of records, the disappearance of evidence, and the apparent government interest in what might otherwise have been dismissed as a simple family tragedy all suggest that what happened at the Hatfield farm touched on matters beyond ordinary criminal investigation. In 1992, a Freedom of Information Act request for the complete Operation Wellspring file was denied on grounds of national security. A subsequent appeal received the response that no such operation exists in our records, despite clear references to it in previously declassified documents. This contradiction only deepened the mystery surrounding the Hatfield case and its apparent connection to early research that may have influenced the development of nuclear technology. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a theoretical physicist who reviewed the available documents as part of a 2005 study on the history of nuclear research, noted, "The descriptions of the material found at the Hatfield site, though vague by modern standards, suggest properties consistent with what we now understand about certain exotic isotopes. What's particularly interesting is the repeated reference to neural or psychological effects, which hints at properties beyond conventional radiation. If such a material does exist, its potential applications would extend far beyond energy production into realms that might explain the continued classification of these historical records." The black sand-like substance found on the Hatfield's hands has been the subject of particular speculation. Modern analysis of similar materials discovered at other sites has identified them as complex compounds containing elements rarely found in nature, with crystalline structures that respond unusually to electromagnetic fields. Some researchers have theorized that such materials might act as conductors for forms of energy not currently recognized by mainstream science, perhaps the telluric currents that Dr. Blackwood mentioned in his journal. Local folklore has predictably embellished the Hatfield story over the decades. Tales of voices from the well and strange lights have become standard elements of Knoxville ghost stories. Some versions claim that Margaret Hatfield still appears near the site on the anniversary of her death, searching for her husband. Others suggest that unusual sounds can be heard at night in the shopping center parking lot, sounds described as humming or whispering that seem to come from below the pavement. While most of these stories can be dismissed as imaginative elaborations, they reflect the enduring impact of the Hatfield case on the collective memory of the region. Something about this particular tragedy resonates beyond the facts of the case, touching on primal fears about what might lie beneath the surface of our ordinary world. The well where the Hatfield family drowned has been filled with earth and concrete, built over and forgotten by most. But beneath the surface, questions still flow through the dark passages of history, occasionally bubbling up to remind us that some mysteries remain unresolved, some depths still unplumbed. In 2018, during an unusually severe storm, a small sinkhole opened in the eastern corner of the shopping center parking lot. Before it could be repaired, several witnesses reported seeing a black, sand-like substance being washed up from below. By the time authorities arrived to investigate, the material had been washed away by the rain. The sinkhole was quickly filled and paved over, with the property management attributing it to normal limestone erosion common in East Tennessee. A sample of the material, collected by a curious bystander and later analyzed at a private laboratory, was found to contain unusual trace elements and crystalline structures inconsistent with typical regional geology. When the results were published on an online forum dedicated to unexplained phenomena, the post was removed within hours, and the account that shared it was permanently suspended for violation of terms of service. As you drive past that ordinary shopping center on the outskirts of Knoxville today, you would never know that you're passing over what might be one of the most significant and disturbing sites in Tennessee history. The Hatfield tragedy has been buried, literally and figuratively, beneath the progress of time and development, yet something of their story persists, like the mysterious black residue that wouldn't wash from their clothes, a stain on history that resists all efforts to remove it, and perhaps that's for the best. Some discoveries, as Jacob Mercer warned Thomas Hatfield in 1878, are not meant to be made. Some waters are not meant to be tested. Some wells should remain sealed, their secrets undisturbed in the darkness below. The Hatfields learned this lesson too late, and paid the ultimate price for their curiosity. Their story serves as a reminder that beneath the familiar surface of our world lie mysteries that defy easy explanation, forces that operate according to laws we may never fully comprehend. The boundary between known and unknown is more permeable than we like to imagine, and sometimes what lies on the other side reaches through to touch our lives in ways both profound and terrifying. Until 1968, a small stone marker stood at the edge of what was once the Hatfield property. Placed there by unknown hands sometime in the 1930s, it bore a simple inscription, "Remember the depths." During the development of the land, this marker disappeared, likely discarded as an unremarkable piece of old farm detritus. But in the archives of East Tennessee history, in redacted government files, and in the persistent local legends that refuse to die, the story of the Hatfield family and their well continues to echo, a warning from the past about the dangers of delving too deeply into the unknown darkness that lies beneath the surface of our ordinary world. In the words of William Hatfield's final journal entry, written on the day he and his family would disappear forever, "Some forces were not meant to be harnessed. God forgive me for what I brought into this house. The modern world has built shopping centers and highways over the site of the tragedy, but no amount of concrete can truly seal what waits below. The well may be gone, but what it connected to remains, patient, persistent, and perhaps still calling to those who might listen too closely to the silence of the Tennessee night."